Hey guys, hope you all are doing well. Today I wanted to post a video about a very common topic that I get asked a lot. How do you set up your Raspberry Pi in headless mode? Say you have a Raspberry Pi with no extra monitor, keyboard, or mouse. How do you set it up? I have a detailed setup process from my course, The Ultimate Guide to Raspberry Pi Tips, Tricks, and Hacks. I'm going to share that section of the course in this video. All links to resources mentioned throughout the setup will be placed in the video description. So without further ado, let's dive in. So I get asked this question quite a lot from a lot of my students. I just got a Raspberry Pi and I don't have an extra keyboard or a monitor or HDMI cable or a mouse. How do I set it up? Well, this actually is a fairly straightforward process, and it's known as setting up your Raspberry Pi in headless mode. So you can use an existing computer or a laptop, and if you just have a Raspberry Pi, you can get it set up pretty quickly. And we'll look at the process of how easy it is to get your Raspberry Pi set up in this way. So what are you going to need? Well, first, a Raspberry Pi 3 or 4. I'm going to be doing the video with a Raspberry Pi 4, but you can use a Raspberry Pi 3 as well. You'll need, of course, a 5-volt power supply for your Pi and a micro SD card. You can use an 8 gig, a 16 or 32 gig. 32 gig would be preferred, but 8 gig can work. And of course, you need to have a micro SD card reader. That's how you're going to insert the micro SD card into your laptop or your computer, and you're able to access it and actually flash it and so on. So next, of course, you're going to need an existing laptop or desktop computer and a wireless network connection. So this is the bare minimum that you'll need to get your Raspberry Pi set up in headless mode. So what does the process look like? Let's take a quick overview of what will be involved. So first, you're going to flash your SD card with the latest version of Raspbian. And once that's done, before we actually boot it up, we'll need to create two special files on our SD card. So these files will be created at a root level, and they're called SSH and wpa_supplicant.conf. And this file is actually the wireless configuration, or I should say the configuration that you'll need to connect to a wireless network. So we'll see how to do that and walk through those steps. Next, we're going to boot out our Pi, and we have to get the IP address of our Pi. So there are many different ways that you can do this, and I'll talk a little bit about the different approaches that can be used. Next up, of course, once we have the IP address, we are going to connect via SSH, and we need to enable a few configuration settings in the Raspbian settings tool, and those would be enabling the VNC viewer, booting to your desktop, and setting the screen resolution. So we'll walk through this process. Finally, when you get all of this done, you can reboot your Pi and use VNC Viewer to connect to your Pi, and you will be in. So that's all that really is involved, and we are going to go through these steps in detail. At the bottom here is a link that can give you a step-by-step guide on how everything is done. So if you take a look at that link, here you'll get the step-by-step details on what you need to do and all the configurations that you need to make. But now we're going to walk through this process step by step. The first step in prepping your SD card is to download the latest version of Raspbian. So head over to raspberrypi.org, and if you click on the downloads link, we want to click on the Raspbian distribution, and we want to download the latest version of Raspbian with desktop. So this may look different depending on when you watch the video, as they are continuously releasing new updates to Raspbian, but go ahead and select the latest version. Typically it would be the first version that shows up here to the left, and click on download zip. It is typically a big download, and it's normally at least a couple gigs. It'll take a while, so I'll go ahead and download it, and we'll pause the video and continue when the download is complete. Okay, so once the download is complete, next up we have to flash that to our SD card. So we'll use Etcher to do that for us. And if you head over to Google and search for Etcher, I did review this in a previous video in the course, but you can click on the first link and download and install Etcher. Very easy, very simple, and there are versions for all different types of operating systems. So select the operating system that's pertinent to you, download and install Etcher, and next let's flash our SD card. So I'm going to fire up Etcher. And once it's loaded up, I'm going to insert my SD card into the SD card reader, and let's insert that into my computer. You'll notice that it was detected automatically by the Etcher software, and first we have to select the image. So let's go ahead and click on Select Image. And we're going to select the version of Raspbian that we downloaded. This was the latest version that I downloaded at the time this video was recorded, so I'll go ahead and select that. And of course you're selecting the .zip file and click on Open. You ensure that your SD card is selected, and you can do a quick verification of the gigabyte. So here it's 32 gig. It's a 32 gig SD card that I am using, and once you verify that, go ahead and click on the flash button. So I'm given a prompt here on the Mac. And once I add in the administrator privileges, now the flashing process starts. So this does take a while to complete. Again, I'm going to pause the video and we will pick it up again when the flashing process has completed. Okay, so now that the flashing process is done, we actually have to create a couple of files, couple of configuration files on the SD card. So we'll check that out in the next video. The next steps in our setup process is that we need to create a couple of configuration files. So when the flashing process is done, typically your SD card is ejected. So you'll want to, of course, take it out of your slot, your SD card slot, and reinsert it. And you should see your SD card showing back up. And the name of the volume should probably be boot. Typically that's what's seen. So you want to click on it, and here you'll see the files. So this would be all the files that were flashed onto the SD card. So at this root level, we want to create a couple of files first of all, and let's get that going. And the first one is just called SSH. No extension, just a blank file that's called SSH. So on a Windows machine, you can right click and do a new file and call it SSH. On the Mac, you can do it from the terminal. You can type in touch SSH once you navigate to the directory or the main volume folder where the SD card is located. Or alternatively, you can open a text editor, and I'm just going to save the file here. And here we are at the boot volume, and I'm just going to call it SSH, no extension, and just uncheck this box. If no extension is provided, use .text. Of course, this is on a Mac, and you want to click save. And once that's done, let's just verify that SSH is created. So here it is, and it's just a blank file that's called SSH. So that's the first file. The next one is a file called wpa_supplicant.conf, and this is where we will configure the wireless settings to connect to our wireless network. So to make things easier, I have provided a link, and there is a wpa_supplicant.conf file in GitHub, and I'll provide that to you as a resource for the video. And to make things easier, you can just simply copy this snippet, and we can create a new file. And here I'm going to do file new, and let's paste that in. So there are a couple of things that we need to change in here. So the first one is the country code. This is the 2-letter ISO country code, and I've also provided a link here where you can get the country codes. And here, I'm just going to scroll to the top. You can select the first letter of your country. I'm just going to select U here for United States. And if you scroll down, we can see it's US. That's a country code. So depending on which part of the world you hail from and you're doing this course with me, just go ahead and select your country and you can get the appropriate 2-letter country code. So once you got that, let's head back over to our text file. And let's type in our country code. So here I'm going to put in US. And next up, we want to enter the SSID and the password for your wireless network. So this is the SSID and the password that your Pi, that is, rephrase. So this is the SSID and password that you need for your Pi to connect to your wireless network. This could be a hotspot on your phone if you're just setting it up and you're not close to a Wi-Fi connection, or it could be the Wi-Fi connection on your home router. So once you have a wireless network, let's go ahead and enter the SSID and password. I'm going to enter my SSID and password here. And the password. And once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and save this file. And we're going to call it WPA underscore supplicant, supplicant .conf, CONF, short for configuration. So again, we're going to uncheck the .text extension and we're going to click on save. So that saves the Wi-Fi configuration file to our SD card, and once that's done, let's proceed to eject our SD card and we will insert it into our Raspberry Pi, insert our power adapter, and we're going to boot up our Pi. Once our Raspberry Pi boots up, the next step is that we need to get the IP address that was assigned to our Raspberry Pi. Now you can go about this in a variety of ways, and to help you, I've provided a link here where you can find the router's IP address, and this page actually tells you in a variety of ways for different operating systems like Windows. You can open up a command prompt and type in ipconfig, and you should see the default gateway. It will tell you what the IP address of your router is. So that is something we want to access, and you'll be able to see the IP address that was assigned to your Pi. Next, you can also on a Mac, just scrolling down here a bit, on OS X, if you go to your system preferences and network, you can actually go to the advanced button, and here under TCP/IP, you'll see your router, and I will do this step here in a second. Also, if you used a hotspot on your iPhone or your Android device, you can go into your network settings and you'll be able to see the IP address that was associated to your Raspberry Pi when it boots up. So in this case, I'm assuming you have a router and you're connected to a Wi-Fi network on your home router, and once you get the IP address of your router, you'll need to log in to the main router homepage, and let's go ahead and get the IP address of my router. So I'm going to go to System Preferences, and I'm going to click on Network and click on Advanced and the TCP/IP, and here is my IP address. So once you get the IP address of the router, you just need to enter that into a browser, and that should bring up the main page to log into the admin console of your router. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And I had already logged in. I have an Aris router. I'm just going to scroll to the bottom here. And you'll notice here is Raspberry Pi. So here I see the IP address that was assigned to my Pi. It's 192.168.1.118. And that's how I was able to get the Raspberry Pi IP address. If you do have a router and perhaps you don't know the admin username and password to log into your router, here's another link I will put as a resource, and routerpasswords.com. Essentially, you can click on this drop down. There is every thinkable router out here, and let's go back to Aris, for example. That's a router that I have, and you click on find password. It would tell you that the default username admin for the username and password for password. So in addition to this, typically at the underside of your router, there is a sticker where you would get the IP address and the username and password. You can also access it that way if you have access to the router itself, and you'll be able to get to the main admin page. So go ahead, find the IP address of your Raspberry Pi, and we're going to continue our setup in the next video. Next up, we're going to SSH to our Raspberry Pi. So in order to do this from a Mac, you can open up the terminal. There's an SSH client that's built in, or you can use the PuTTY client. I show how to install this and get this set up in another section in the course, connecting remotely to your Raspberry Pi. Or if you're using Windows 10, you can enable the new built-in SSH commands. So I'll post a link here as a resource, and if you go to this page, it actually shows you how you can install this as an additional feature or an optional feature and enable the SSH client. So this is already built into Windows 10. So you can do that if you're on a Windows 10 machine. So let's go ahead and fire up a terminal here on the Mac. So once you have your terminal fired up, you can type in ssh pi at, and you can paste in the IP address of your Raspberry Pi and hit enter, and you'll get a prompt to continue connecting to accept the authenticity of the host. So we know that that's the IP of our Raspberry Pi, and let's type yes. And for the password, the default password is Raspberry. So it's RASPBERRY. So once we do that, now we're actually connected to our Raspberry Pi. So we can do an ls, we can see the files on the system, and next, let's go ahead and do the configurations that we need to do in raspi-config. And we need to tweak 3 separate settings. So let's type in sudo raspi-config. Hit enter, and now we are in the Raspberry Pi configuration module. So the first thing we need to do is enable the VNC server. So if we use the down arrow, we can go down to interfacing options, hit enter, and we can go down to VNC, hit enter, and it will ask if you would like the VNC server to be enabled. Yes, we do. So you can use the left arrow, select yes, hit enter, then hit enter again on OK. So once that's set up, next we want to select to boot to the desktop. So if you use the down arrow and you want to go to boot options, and we want to select desktop CLI, choose whether to boot into a desktop environment. So we want to hit enter, and we want to select the last option, desktop auto login. So that's the desktop auto login and automatically logged in as the Pi user. So you want to select enter. Last but not least, let's specify a screen resolution. So we need to set this up so that we can connect to our Pi. So to do that, let's use the down arrow, and we're going to go to advanced options, and we can go down again to resolution to set a specific screen resolution, hit enter, and I am just going to select the highest resolution here, which is 1920 by 1080, because I have a high resolution monitor that I am working with. But again, you can select whatever resolution is pertinent to you, and this isn't fixed. If you select something that doesn't look quite right, you can always go back in and change it when you connect back again to your Pi, or when you connect via VNC. So go ahead and select an option here. You can select the highest resolution if you choose so, and if we push the right arrow, we can go down to OK and hit enter again, and once that's done, hit the right arrow and you'll come down to select finish, and hit enter to finish. And now you'll be prompted to reboot your Raspberry Pi. So go ahead and select yes to reboot your Pi, and it will of course disconnect from the SSH session. Give it a couple minutes, and once your Pi is back up, let's proceed to connect via VNC. So once our Pi boots back up, we need to connect using a VNC client. So we'll use the VNC viewer from Real VNC, and you can get to it from this page. I'll provide that as a resource for the video. Click on download VNC viewer, and there's a version for every type of operating system, and even mobile devices have an installer for Real VNC for the VNC viewer. So once you get VNC viewer installed, I'm going to fire it up here on the Mac. And once it loads up, let's go ahead and enter the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. So go ahead and type that in, hit enter, and we will get a prompt here to verify the server identity. So go ahead and click on continue. And we need to enter some information here. Let's put in the username. So the username, of course, is Pi, and the password is Raspberry, Raspberry, and we can remember the password, and we can click OK. And there we have it. We just connected to our Raspberry Pi. So let's go ahead and maximize this, and if you, at the top, click on the Enter Full Screen option, and here is our Raspberry Pi. So we have successfully connected to our Raspberry Pi without using a monitor, without using an HDMI cable and a mouse and an additional keyboard, just our Raspberry Pi, an SD card, and our power supply, and an existing computer, and let the fun begin. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, and hope you were able to set up your Raspberry Pi in headless mode. If you want to learn more about Raspberry Pi, how to build projects, and get tips and tricks like this, check out my online course, The Ultimate Guide to Raspberry Pi. You can get the link from the description below. If you enjoyed this tutorial, hit the like button for the video and subscribe to get more videos. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Links are provided in the description below. Until next time, build on, friends.